Amidst a cost of living crisis and a housing situation that continues to price ordinary people out of the market, it's perhaps no surprise that homelessness is becoming more and more of a problem in Jersey. As an organisation that helps homeless men get back on their feet, Sanctuary Trust is on the front line. In this special episode of The Interview, Abby Nance, Head of Fundraising and Communications for Sanctuary Trust, spoke to Housing Minister Deputy David Warr and Frank Walker OBE, former Chief Minister and Chairman of Sanctuary Trust. They discuss what homelessness is and how it's defined, what causes it, who is affected, and just what can be done about it.
Deputy David Warr, Housing Minister, and Frank Walker OBE, thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us today about the housing crisis in the island and homelessness. I'm going to start the interview by directing a question to you, Deputy Warr. It's nearly a year since you've been in the position of Housing Minister. What impact do you think you've had?
I'd like to think a degree of impact. It's always difficult because it's such a big subject matter. You know, the areas which we're really focused in on at the moment are sort of the gateway and access to the gateway. So that's, the general public having access to housing and social housing in some ways. So one area which I've been very focused on is how do we open that up and give more accessibility. We successfully did a change at the end of December, beginning of January, and by the end of June, I think we will be looking to pull the age down from 45 to 25. So I think that's going to be a big change for people to access social housing.
Fantastic. You published a definition of homelessness. What difference would you say this has made, and what do you hope it's going to achieve? Well,
I think the most important thing is it's created an awareness. I think everybody's thought of homelessness as something, people on streets. You go around the streets of London, you see people lying on the street. Actually, it's much more complex than that. And this is around, so the definition has been really helpful to go into more depth on that front. And so we've talked about things like rooflessness, we're talking about overcrowding, we've talked about insecure housing. So I think that's been really, really helpful. It's also helpful from our front desk, as it were, when we see people come in the door through the Housing Advisory Service, and that is that they can use, you hate to use a horrible word like triaging when you're talking about human beings, but this ability to separate out the different issues that people have who come in and looking for advice. And so that's giving us a richer form of data, and that data hopefully we can then put into the actual housing providers such as shelter, and then what I call triage that. In other words, understand whether we have the right resources in the right places, and that's really, really important. And this data is going to be really helpful for the future, development of housing within this island.
I think it's really important that the Minister is taking such a close interest in the homelessness issue. We at Sanctuary Trust are only too vividly aware of how big an issue it is and has been for many years now. We, of course, are limited in the number of men we can take in. So anything that government can do to help us and other charities dealing with the homelessness issue is more than welcome. And it's been great since Deputy Warr took office. His close interest has been really helpful. No doubt we still need more help, of course, but no doubt I'm looking forward to further help as we move forward.
Thanks very much for that, Frank. Now, so what would you consider more help to look like? What would you really want the island to be doing to tackle homelessness?
Well, I think, as Deputy Warr said, the first thing is we need to identify the extent of the problem, because there have been all sorts of guesstimates about how many homeless people. Now, we at Sanctuary Trust only take in homeless men, but of course, homeless women is an equal problem. There have been so many guesstimates about how many there are. It would be enormously helpful to have more specific and accurate data in that regard, and then we, working with other charities who do a similar job to us, we're then in a really good position to think about what more resources do we need more buildings, do we need more rooms, do we need more staff, And hopefully, you never know, one day we might even get government financial support, which we don't get any at the moment, but should things advance in that direction, that would be very welcome as well.
Deputy Warr, I mean, you're talking, Frank, there about data. I'm aware that you are very much looking at that at the moment, and you're due to publish some statistics to give an indication of the real scale of homelessness in the island. Can you give us any sort of indication of what your collection of data is finding at the moment?
Well, at this moment in time, we're still in the early phases of that, and I think by the time this broadcast goes out, I'd like to think we're going to be in a far better position. It's actually quite a complex issue. One is for us to, what I call, when people come into the Housing Advice Service, to sort out what the issues are with those individuals at that point. But also the other issue is from the other end, which is who are the people in shelter at this moment in time, and what are their needs, and what does that look like? So it could be the women's refuge, it can be shelter, it can be, as Frank has alluded to here, sanctuary. And what we're trying to do is to get all of that data collected up. What's very easy for us to do is to duplicate data. So in other words, we've placed people in certain areas through the Housing Advice Service, but actually that number then is somehow repeated coming the other way. And so what we have to be very careful with is that we know that the data is true, it's rich, and it's as varied as we think it should be. So my initial reaction was, and this is from my business background, is I want it yesterday. I now realize that in a larger organization such as government, things don't happen yesterday. There's a lot more information on that front. So I am being quite careful in that respect. But by the end of June, I think we're going to be in a far better position in terms of having the right data and then analysing that in a much more sophisticated way. And of course, after that, it's working with the homelessness cluster, as it were, to establish exactly where we go from here. And I'm quite excited by it, because I think it's really, really important that at last we'll be getting to grips with something which is a really serious issue.
Yeah. I mean, Frank, we obviously are acutely aware of what we see at Sanctuary Trust, whether there have been significant numbers banded around in the past, sort of, in excess of 1,000 people potentially homeless. And I think making that clear distinction about homelessness versus rooflessness, i.e. not seeing people sleeping rough on the streets. But Frank, what do you really see as the big issue over here that's causing these numbers of people that we're seeing?
Oh, I think without question, one of the big issues of late anyway is the cost of accommodation. And we're now getting at Sanctuary, for the first time in numbers, we're getting men coming to us who are in reasonable jobs, but despite that, they're no longer able to afford the rent. And that's a real crisis for Jersey, which I know the Minister is on top of. Other than that, the reasons that guys turn to us for help when their lives have basically imploded, there's numerous reasons. Could be marriage breakdown, could be loss of job, it could be alcohol or drug abuse, all sorts of domestic abuse even, all sorts of issues. But the big new problem is unaffordability.
And obviously we've seen quite a lot of work in your department looking at rents and also bringing in the empty home service that you've established. Talk a little bit about that. What impact is that having?
Sure. So vacant homes or empty homes. One of my big concerns in Jersey is that we have a huge amount of built environment already in existence. Sadly, a good deal of that is not efficiently used or effectively used. So in this constant challenging where we're trying to build more accommodation, but being restricted by where we can build that accommodation. So the vacant homes concept came out of the census, and I think the last census came up with a number of 4,000 vacant homes, which was completely bonkers as a realistic number. We've now managed to get that down, we believe, to around 900. Now, if you think about 900 homes being empty in this island, that's almost like a quarter of the supply that's needed to be built. So how come all of these homes are empty or are vacant? And, another big number I'd just like to put on there is this is something of the order of £500 million worth of real estate. This is 6 months of government spending. The numbers are just insane. And yet we've done so little to look into this and dig into this subject, which is very complex indeed.
Yeah.
In your election manifesto, you said you were fundamentally against any form of rent control on the private sector. Do you still stand by this?
I've been held up to the account for this on many times. Let's determine what we mean by rent control. Okay, so the first thing I would say is we're not going around into the private sector and telling somebody who has a one-bedroom flat or a landlord, this is how much you charge for that flat. That is not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is let's be transparent about what a rent increase looks like, how we match that up. Is it going to be a retail price index? Is it going to be once a year? Be very, very clear when the tenant joins, signs onto an agreement, that they know exactly what those costs are going to look like. I mean, management fees are other things which people come up with all the time as well. So it's not just rent, it's management fees. It's other, almost like off the scene fees, which people get caught up in and have problems with. So I think we need a lot more transparency. And in that respect, what we're looking to do now is we're producing a white paper, which is going to be for discussion with the Estates Assembly, which is, I think, going to be very, 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 very helpful. But also, by the end of this year, beginning of next year, I want to have a completely brand new residential tenancy law in place, which is fit for purpose 21st century. Right now, we've got disparate laws all over the place, and it's almost impossible to negotiate your way through that. So I've challenged the team around me to say, come on, let's come up with a brand new system, which not only is in the private sector but also in the social rented sector, because obviously we've seen housing trusts get caught up in this whole rental increase debacle, and we need some way of putting eyes on all of that as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, that announcement a few weeks ago by one of the housing trusts of a very considerable increase in rent at very short notice, that can't be fair on tenants. And I was delighted when the Minister and others intervened, and that's been pretty well, whether or not it's been resolved, I don't know, but it's certainly been delayed. But David, if I could pick up another issue, it goes back to the affordability question. Andium, for some years now, have been running really good support schemes, both for tenants and also, in particular, I think, first-time buyers. And I've never quite understood why why government hasn't taken on a similar scheme throughout the wider range of the housing stock. Are there any plans in that respect at the moment?
Well, I think the thing which you're probably aware of, way back in, I think it's 2021, there was a sum of money of £10 million, which was ring-fenced by the government of the day to exactly help that, assist with purchasing. Now, it's seemingly, and that ball has now landed very much in my court, and it seems that it's been very difficult for previous housing ministers to actually spend that money, which is unusual in government, I have to be honest with you. However, I think there is a lot of complexity in that. What we will do is, in the next 6 months, we are going to publish what we are going to do, how we are going to bring that money into the marketplace. We've come out of some very extreme situations. We've come out of an interest rate environment which was zero, pretty much, which, as a result of that, a lot of people who had savings were investing in property, in buy-to-lets. We've saw a lot of that heat in that market. We saw huge, Santander entered the market and started doing big multipliers, 40-year mortgages, all sorts of things. Now that's all coming to a grinding halt as well. So there's been a lot of very significant factors which have really contributed to the huge increase in housing costs. I'm hoping in 2023 that's going to become mitigated as the year goes on. However, there is no doubt there is still a gap between what your average person on average income can afford and what the price of a home is today. And one of my jobs is to find out how we can release that funding into the market to help support and get people onto the housing ladder, because I think it's really, really important that we deliver that. However, the biggest danger we have is we inflate the housing market. In other words, we give a signal that it's a one-way ticket to investors. In other words, house prices can only go up. There's never a downside to this, and we just have to be very careful how we deliver that impact.
I get that, but I'm very pleased to hear you say that you clearly you're aware of the affordability gap, and I'm very pleased to hear that you've got specific thoughts developing on how to overcome that. To me, it's one of the biggest crises Jersey's faced almost in my lifetime. There are just way too many people turning up on our door at Sanctuary Trust who, as I've already said, can no longer afford rents. And what's even worse, that's bad enough, but what's even worse, the number of people, particularly young Jersey people, who are now saying, I can't afford to live in Jersey, I'm going elsewhere. And a member of my wife's family and his family have done that in recent months, and we know that many, many, many more are doing the same thing. And that's our future. If we can't keep our young people in the island, we're mortgaging our future, whichever way you look at it. And I think it's really good news that David is well aware of that, and I absolutely get that it's really complex. One thing to be aware of it, it's really difficult to deal with it, but gosh, we really do need some clear decision taking and action where it's possible to address this issue. As I say, otherwise, our future as an island, in the context of who's going to be fulfilling the jobs, who's going to be creating the communities that we rely on so much, our future doesn't look great.
And I think what we're saying there, it is complex. It is difficult. It's going to take time. In the interim, the homeless problem is growing. Is it fair that it's charities like Sanctuary Trust, Shelter Trust, JAFE that are having to tackle the problem head on, and actually with really limited resources?
And absolutely, the answer to your question in simple terms, no, it isn't. I think that's how I would view it, because I don't think this is an issue which we can rely on charity. I think we have to understand that there is a place for charity to play. However, there has to be a strategy from government which doesn't rely on a charitable strategy being right. So what we need to do is we need to properly resource that. And of course, one of the things we're doing at the moment, and this is my biggest thing, I think, is this building program we are on at the moment, and that is building literally thousands of homes now up to 2030. I was looking at some stats the other day, and it's been shameful how few homes have been built over. There have been odd years, blips, where we've seen increases, but on average been delivering something of the order of 230 to 250 homes a year into the market, and that's just simply too few. And our problem right now is we're in catch up. So as much as everybody says, there won't be anybody to fill all these, I can assure you there are plenty of people out there who will fill these homes. And also on top of that, I think what it will do is it will give more choice to the market, and that should in turn bring down rental prices, in particular rental, rather than mortgages. Obviously mortgages are a different ballgame. But what I do want to see is, we come back to using Andium and leveraging them, is about these no deposits putting down, and that's something we can do. Things which people cannot save for a mortgage because they're paying so much out in rent. So how can we use Andium, or how can we use Jersey Development Company to assist in that way to give people access to the housing market?
I think that no deposit scheme that Andium operate together with shared equity as a method of purchase, I think that's so important, and I'm really pleased to hear you say that. You probably won't agree with us, David, that to an outside observer, one of the current problems in providing enough housing units would appear to be planning. There's been a significant number of developments knocked back by the planning subcommittee in recent times, and that seems to me to be just totally contrary to what the island so desperately needs. You needn't comment on that, but that's a personal view, and I find it disturbing that there doesn't seem to be enough joined up thinking in this regard to solve the problem.
I can't let you get away without a little challenge on that one. So what I would say is, I agree with you. It does from the outside look bizarre that we are demanding more homes to be built, and yet we are we've seen sites, one on Broad Street, a major site being turned down. We've seen Jersey Development Company's South Hill site being turned down for, again, issues around light, scale of units and things like this. And it's really, this is our challenge today. We have the idyllic world, which is we have minimum standards, minimum sizes and minimum square meters of home space. However, that comes at a cost. And so one of the challenges is, can we build smaller? Now, the South Hill development was turned down because there were too many, quotes, smaller units, and some of the units only had what we call single aspect. In other words, they were facing the cliff face. Now, you have to understand that if you live in St Helier and you've got higher density, there are going to be issues around. Not everybody's going to have a sea view. Not everybody can have this, So we have to find a balance between those and recognise that these are the limitations. We are going to have to build some accommodation, which isn't ideal. But on the other hand, if we don't have a home at all, that's surely the worst case scenario. So I think the tension is within planning is where do we find that balance? Where do we find that, should people be allowed to live in what they call substandard accommodation? Not at all. I absolutely disagree with that. However, if in a site you have, 80% of the accommodation is of an appropriate standard and meets all the, is 20% being slightly below that standard appropriate for the overall scheme to go ahead? We will never find perfection. Perfection is in the world of the gods. If we wait for perfection, we won't do anything. So I think we have to understand that we have to flex these issues a bit, and that won't obviously please the ears of some people.
You're spot on. Too often we strive for perfection and end up doing nowhere near enough. And it's a difficult one, but there has to be balance. And the point you made is so right. A less than perfect home is still a home, which is far better than no home at all. And hopefully planning are going to be clearer and more proactive, if you like, and more practical looking forward than I sense they've been in recent times.
You're talking about no home. You both slept in Pier Road car park last year in November, and I think that's a sign of sort of government and charities actually becoming more interlinked. I think there's a lot of work going on in this space, raising awareness around homelessness in Jersey. It does feel like there is a more coordinated and collaborative approach between government and the charities to tackle homelessness today. Do you think that's right, Frank? Do you feel
Yes, I do. I mentioned already that since David took over the role of Housing Minister, we've had far more interest, far more involvement and far more support than we've ever had. Well, certainly, I've been involved in the charity now for 11 years, and this is the most proactive involvement we've had from a Housing Minister and from government in that time, and it really is very, very welcome.
I mean, in an ideal world, and you've said this many times, we would eradicate homelessness, so there would not be a need for charities like Sanctuary Trusts. I mean, how realistic is it that becomes, the reality in the island? Do we have a strategy for eradicating homelessness? I mean, how can we measure it?
It'll never happen, but that shouldn't stop any of us aiming for it. As long as we're aiming to eradicate it, then we will be keeping very active, very proactive in terms of dealing with it. But there will always be people whose marriage breaks up, who lose their jobs or whatever it may be, who end up as a result homeless. What we've got to do, realistically, we've got to aim for eradicating it. Realistically, what we're going to do, and I think are doing, is and certainly will do in the future, is reduce the number of homeless people as far as we possibly can.
What about all the people in the island who still don't believe or don't realise or deny that there is a homeless issue? What would the message be to them?
I just find it very frustrating because I think it just breeds complacency. I mean, we talked about vacant homes earlier on. That's complacency. That's absolutely, allowing buildings to fall apart because I don't know, you don't feel there's a need, or society says, actually, we can tolerate that. That's fine because I've got a home and I don't need to worry about it, but it's a bit of an eyesore. They're not actually thinking about the gold dust that is a home and having a home. And I think that stability, that security of tenure, and I think that's for me is kind of my driving force. It's quite interesting. We've obviously our homelessness strategy has literally only just kicked off. End of January, I think we set up a service. We're now up to 220 homes, vacant homes, having been reported to us, and we're quietly triaging our way through. But one of the homes which has been brought to to our attention was owned by a lady who died in 1975, okay? And we can't find any heirs. This home has just been left. And it's one of these situations whereby everybody's looked at everybody else and going, oh, I thought you were dealing with it. I thought you were dealing with it. And actually, nobody's done anything with it at all. And so we're very proactively trying to get this home back into market. I was just reflecting upon this lady, whether, if you're a God-fearing individual, looking down from up there saying, why is no one living in my home? I don't need it anymore. And it's this home, and we're crying out for family homes. I get criticised all the time for high density. There's too many one bedrooms, too many two bedrooms, Minister, not enough garden space, etc., etc. Yeah, all of these vacant homes have all of that, but we seem to refuse to bite the bullet and get on and deal with this issue. I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of an appropriate word. I can't find a word at the moment which would say just how terrible that is. But it just breeds complacency. And I think this is where a lot of people in Jersey, I know, feel that the haves and have-nots. They're the homeowners, and then there are those people who are struggling with their rents. And we have to bridge that gap. We have to say, no, there isn't. We're all in this together, and we need to resolve this problem together.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. But interesting comment there about the have and the have-nots, and there clearly is a massive gulf in Jersey at the moment. But thinking about some of the haves, at least, there have been quite a lot of adverse publicity and comment recently, not for the first time, about wealthy immigrants coming to Jersey. Well, speaking from Sanctuary Trust point of view, I think it's absolutely certain to say that without the support of some of those wealthy immigrants, a significant number of them, I don't think we'd exist. We don't get government funding, and the amount of support financially that we've had from wealthy immigrants has just been sensational. And I really don't think we'd have been able to balance the books probably for the last 3-4 maybe years, maybe even longer, without that support. And that's something that doesn't get, in my opinion, doesn't get enough publicity in Jersey. There's a lot of these people who are playing a really active part in the community, supporting charities like us and doing a host of other things. I heard of two wealthy residents recently who totally anonymously, they refuse any publicity, have given it's either iPads or laptops, I'm not sure which, to a school, given them completely free. In our case, we operate from 3 buildings, and one couple, who again will have no publicity at all, bought both those buildings a little while ago, and they charge us £1 a year rent. Now, we'd be paying, if we were paying market value on those buildings over the last so many years, it would have amounted to hundreds of thousands of pounds, which we haven't got. And I think that side of the have argument isn't getting enough airtime in Jersey, and we really need to better understand the contribution that a lot of these people are making to the have-nots. We talk about this gulf, quite rightly, but some of the haves, not all of course, but some of the haves are doing a huge amount to support the have-nots.
I'm going to ask you one final question now, and it's a bit of a wave a magic wand moment for both of you. If Frank, starting with you, if you could literally wave a magic wand regarding homelessness in Jersey, what would you want to achieve?
Well, it wouldn't exist. That would be the ultimate magic wand. Perhaps I'd have a slightly weaker magic wand than that. So trying to be a bit practical, I would like to. I think what we need to see is much more of what David has said government is doing, identifying the extent of the problem, identifying the roots of the problem, and then working very closely with all the charities who support homeless people, working very closely with us to make sure that we're doing every possible thing as an island all together to address and minimise the problem.
And Deputy Warr, if we come to you on this, in a year's time, it would be 2 years in the role, what would we like to talk about in a year's time?
Well, I think what I'd like to talk about is how St Helier, being the capital of our island, how it's improved in terms of its livability. You know, people want to live in St Helier rather than going, oh, well, if I have a choice, I'll go out and live in the countryside. I think it's really important that we get what we call permeability through St Helier. We have joined up thinking throughout St Helier. You know, the Fort Regent is in one of the biggest parks, and it's never visited by most people today. I think it's really important we get that back up and running again. But I think it's that linkage through town where you can walk or cycle safely through town, because we've managed to link up all the different aspects of town. So therefore, the quality of town as a resident will be significantly improved. So is that a magic wand? I hope it's not a magic wand, because I hope that's going to be government policy, you know, in future groups. But I think it's really important. But it does take long-term commitment, and I'm sure in my time as housing minister, a lot of the stuff that I would like to be done will not have been delivered, but I hope I've managed to put it on the track where people can see where we're going. Because I think for too long, people haven't understood where we're headed. And I think it's that vision, isn't it? We need that clear vision, which lots of people get the hang of. And for too long, we talked about it and talked. And I'm talking to an ex-chief minister here who knows what talking looks like, instead of actually action. And I think politicians need to action. And that's my thing is, if we can act, we can do stuff. And heck, we're 9x5 island, 103,000 people. If we can't get things turned around, you know, what use is there for any other, or hope I should say, is there for any other jurisdiction?
Last word from you, Frank?
I agree with that. That's the last word, I think.
Thank you both for your time today.
Thank you, it's our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you to Deputy David Warr and Frank Walker for taking the time to discuss their views on homelessness in Jersey. Sanctuary Trust is Connect Magazine's charity partner for 2023, and you can read their feature in the May edition of the magazine by heading to the Bailiwick Express website. If you want to support the work of Sanctuary Trust in helping homeless men get back on their feet, you can do so by visiting their website at www.sanctuarytrust.org.je.